All right, let's talk about the coalition, the complexities of the coalitions, and predictions are that come 2024 general elections, no party will amass 50% plus as far as the votes are concerned. So predictions are that political parties might be compelled to enter into coalitions come 2024. So if coalitions are not working in local government municipalities and there's a change of government from time to time, what hope do we have? Do we have to blame ourselves as the voters for not giving one party the majority? Or this is what democracy is all about. We exercise our universal adult suffrage so that we vote the people that we prefer to represent us in parliament and different legislatures across the 9 provinces. But what if our voting patterns determines a coalition? Anyway, we'll have to wait and see. But for now, let's welcome Dr. Corné Mulder, who's the leader of the Freedom Front Plus and also a spokesperson for the now gone coalition in the city of Johannesburg. Dr. Mulder, good morning to you. Welcome to Power.
Yes, good morning. Good morning to you and your listeners, and thank you for the opportunity. Let me just rectify. I'm not the president of the party. I'm the leader of the party in the Western Cape, but I'm also the chairperson of the technical committee that negotiated all these coalition agreements and that meets on a weekly basis to discuss the coalitions and the way forward.
All right, chairperson, not spokesperson, of the chairperson of the technical committee that's negotiating the coalitions going forward.
Yes.
Let's look at the coalition in Johannesburg. It started as if there is consensus. You guys were hitting the ground running. You had all the coalition parties, the likes of Patriotic Front, Action SA, and so on and so forth. But then there was talk that there will be a motion that's going to be sponsored to oust the Speaker of the city of Johannesburg, that is Speaker Vasco da Gama. And obviously you took the process to court because of the illegally convened meeting by then Chair of Chairs, Ms. Colleen Makubele. But once that was put aside, then the meeting was properly convened by the acting municipal manager and you lost the speaker. Dr. Mulder, what went wrong as far as that is concerned? Because it seems as if the coalition was stable, you guys were running programs and so on. What went wrong? That led to, firstly, the vote of no confidence against Speaker Vasco da Gama.
Yes. Let me start off by saying, reacting to your introduction, you're absolutely correct in terms of coalitions and how the electorate see those coalitions and the role that coalitions will play. And I can assure you that coalitions has come to stay and that we, on the way to 2024, will have more coalitions. And most likely after the 2024 provincial and national level election, we will have coalitions most likely on provincial and even on national level. So that's just the reality. If I can come to Johannesburg, for example, and I think the numbers are quite important because in politics, in the end, it's about the numbers. You need to have a majority to successfully govern. And if one party can't obtain a majority on their own, they either go into opposition or they form a coalition and they cooperate with other parties. Now, if you look at the numbers in the City Council of Johannesburg, you'll find the following. The total number of councillors are 270. So if you want to govern, you need a group of 136 votes to govern. Now, after the 2021 election, no party obtained a majority on their own. The ANC ended up with 91 seats in the council. The Democratic Alliance with 71, Action SA with 44, the EFF with 29, and so you can go on. So what we did was we formed a coalition government, which was quite a stable government. We signed the agreement on the 15th of December of last year. And that coalition basically consisted of the Democratic Alliance, Action South Africa, the IFP, the Freedom Front Plus, the ACDP, the UIM, and somewhat two of the other smaller parties. At that stage, the Patriotic Alliance of Mr. Gayton McKenzie was not part of that coalition agreement. Later on, we negotiated the Patriotic Alliance, and they became a member of the coalition in February of this year, and that had the effect that we then had a clear majority of 140 seats out of 270. So the coalition had 140 seats, and the opposition grouping consisting of the ANC, the EFF, and some other smaller parties at 130. And that enabled us to have a stable majority and to govern. However, the problem is that we in South Africa do not have a normal democracy. The ANC, as far as I'm concerned, never accepted the reality that they lost power in the city of Johannesburg. So throughout, since the election, we experienced almost on a daily basis attempts to destabilize the coalition government in the city of Johannesburg with various attempts, one thing after the other. And then a motion of no confidence was brought, as you correctly point out, in the Speaker, Mr. Vasco da Gama. Now, it should be no problem for the coalition government to defeat such a motion of no confidence because we have 140 votes. But what then happened was, and all the parties in the coalition are united in defeating that motion of no confidence. The coalition was then betrayed by some individuals, not political parties, but by some individuals within these political parties. For example, 2 members from the ACDP voted against the decision of the coalition, and they supported the motion of no confidence. 1 member of the IFP did the same, and then the 1 member of COPE, Corné did also the same. And because they voted against the coalition, it allowed the opposition, the ANC, the EFF, to succeed with that motion of no confidence. Now, that was clear betrayal, absolutely going against the wishes of the parties that they belong to. And what the parties then did was they immediately acted because they are serious role players and they are genuine in what they want to do. All the parties then immediately took steps against those rogue councillors who acted in their own interest and not in terms of how the electorate voted. And the parties expelled them. We kicked them out. They're no longer councillors today. The only party that was not able to do that is the Congress of the People. And that is a sorry state of affairs. The Congress of the People seems to be a paralyzed party. That is what is left of that party. So they were not able to act. But in any case, the other parties expelled those members, replaced them with other members, and we then went back to have a majority of 138, which is a clear majority, and we could then defeat the election to elect a new speaker. So we were ready to elect a new speaker. We had negotiations within the coalition group throughout to come to an agreement in terms of who should be our candidate and who we're going to vote for, etc., etc. And I can give you the details in that regard as well. However, when we got to the election itself, 2 political parties within the coalition betrayed the voters, and they betrayed the coalition agreement, and they broke their word which they gave. The one is the Patriotic Alliance of Mr. Gayton McKenzie, and the other one is COPE, the party of Mr. Lekota. Those 9 votes, one from the COPE and the other 8 of the Patriotic Alliance, were given to the ANC and the EFF. And if you take away that 9 votes from the coalition, then we fall from 138 to 129, and those 9 votes were given to the ANC, and that assisted them to then elect Corné Makubele with 141 against 129. And that is basically what happened. So 2 parties betrayed the coalition, and they betrayed their voters as well. And that is why the coalition then could not succeed in electing their own speaker.
Okay.
And then from there on, the new speaker moved very quickly to satisfy her new masters, the ANC and the EFF.
Okay. We hear the background, and now it is water under the bridge. The speaker of the DA-led coalition gone. It's been replaced by Corné Makubele of COPE. The mayor of the DA-led coalition, Dr. Mpopalatsi, she's gone, replaced by now the new executive mayor of the ANC-led coalition, Dada Morero.
Yes.
Now, we are being told, Dr. Mulder, that the leader of the coalition, that is the DA, is to be blamed for this because there were suggestions that they need to compromise in terms of distribution of power, to say, especially when this motion is coming up for the second time against the Vasco da Gama, can we field a different candidate, particularly from the IFP, and apparently the DA refused. Is that the true state of affairs, where people are blaming the DA for the collapse of this coalition?
Let me explain to you exactly what happened. We had the election in November of 2021. And immediately after the election, there was some first informal discussions to form a coalition. We couldn't succeed and we couldn't put a coalition together, and those negotiations failed. Now, the problem is our legislation in South Africa is out of date. It does not make provision for the formation of coalitions in the way that it should. Let me just explain. It takes a long time to form a coalition. It can take months because you need to get parties to agree amongst each other. You need to negotiate a coalition agreement. You need to negotiate the positions of government. Our legislation does not make provision for that. Our legislation forces parties within 14 days, 42 weeks, you have to elect a new mayor, you have to elect a speaker, you have to elect a chief whip of council. That's what the legislation currently says. So when we could not agree, we were forced to go into that election. We didn't know what was going to happen. And the Democratic Alliance then nominated their candidates at that stage, Dr. Polatse and Vasco da Gama, and their chief whip, and so did the ANC. It's a secret ballot. So in that stage, in the beginning of December when we voted, parties voted against the ANC, including the EFF, and voted against the ANC. And in that way, those DA people were elected. So we started off, as you correctly point out, with the DA mayor, DA speaker, DA chief whip. After that, we started to negotiate a coalition agreement. But those positions were already filled. So the argument is we negotiated the government after that, and we then allocated different positions in government to the different coalition partners. When the Patriotic Alliance joined the coalition in February, for example, we amended the coalition agreement because by agreement, Freedom Front Plus let go of one of our positions and gave that to accommodate the Patriotic Alliance. So we did accommodate to bring in and strengthen the coalition. Originally, we did not want to tamper with the position of Speaker because the majority is so slim, and because you have to deal with the secret ballot, it's a risk. So we didn't touch that. And we were not going to touch that. But because of the betrayal of a few independent councillors who acted on their own, suddenly now we were confronted, here is a vacancy. So the argument was put forward to say, while we have to deal with this vacancy, can't we use the opportunity to bring more equitable power sharing arrangement in the council? And that would implicate that we bring in somebody from the IFP or from another party into the position of speaker and then broaden the power sharing agreement. That was the discussion internally. Now, obviously, Democratic Alliance argued to say, no, we were elected into that position already in December. During the negotiations, the other parties accepted the fact that we have the position of speaker, and in terms of the agreement, we believe we're entitled to that position. The counter-argument was to say, yes, we understand all of that. However, circumstances have changed, and it's in the best interest of the coalition to strengthen the coalition that we broaden the power sharing arrangement, and we ask you to let go of that position and to fill it with a different partner in the coalition, and the idea was the IFP, and that will broaden the whole scope. But that was the discussion, and you're correct. In the end, the Democratic Alliance insisted and said, no, they are entitled to this position. They did compromise to say, okay, they're not going to put Mr. Vasco da Gama again, they will bring another candidate. But the other parties in the coalition said, we understand that, but we think it's in the best interest of the coalition to spread and broaden the power sharing arrangement. The DA didn't want to do that. Now, all the other coalition parties, although they were not happy about that eventuality and said, okay, fine, we will protect the coalition and we will broaden and explore a further negotiation in time, but we will be loyal to the coalition. They all did, and they voted in terms of the decision that we took, although they were not all happy with that decision. Everybody voted with the decision to support the Democratic Alliance's candidate. The only party that were not prepared to do that and then left the coalition and then joined the ANC coalition with the EFF was the Patriotic Alliance. And we couldn't prevent that from happening when the Patriotic Alliance started to negotiate with Mr. Paul Masitile and they made some agreements with the ANC. They withdrew those 8 votes. The one vote from Cope was lost right from the beginning because Colleen Makubele is on a folly of her own, obviously. And because that happened, it had the implication that we couldn't get our people elected, first the speaker, and then we couldn't defend the mayor. So it's correct. It's factually correct that there's a difference of interpretation. The Democratic Alliance insisted on their seat in terms of the coalition agreement, and they felt strongly about that. The counter-argument was, yes, we understand that, but we believe we can strengthen the coalition to broaden the representation in the power-sharing arrangement. And that was a difference, and that was a dispute. And looking back, that caused, obviously, a breakdown in terms of trust, and the Patriotic Alliance left, and then that brought us to a certain extent where we are today. There is a question, obviously, also that needs to be asked, was that the only reason why the Patriotic Alliance left, or were the Patriotic Alliance already in negotiations with the ANC prior to these happenings, and this could be a very helpful excuse why they left the coalition? I don't know.
All right, I'm in conversation with Dr. Corné Mulder, the leader of the Freedom Front Plus in the Western Cape and also chairman of the technical committee responsible for the coalitions. And we are reflecting on the coalition that is specifically in Johannesburg. Now we understand the history and the background. I want us to focus on the way forward now, because all that the residents of Johannesburg are interested in is services. They want to see electricity, water, rates being done and so on. Let's start first. Dr. Mulder, you mentioned the fact that the ANC from the word-go, they didn't want to accept that they've lost power. From day one, They kept on trying to destabilize the governing coalition and so on and so forth. Now that you are out of power through legitimate means, are you going to stay in the opposition benches going forward, or are we going to see you taking the posture of the ANC of trying to reverse this merry-go-round again? What's going to be the approach?
Let me just try to explain. First of all, I've got no doubt in my mind that the procedure that played out in the last 2-3 days in terms of which the new mayor was elected, I've got no doubt that that was illegally done. It was not done in terms of legislation. It was not done in terms of the rules of council. And if we bring a court application, that will be found most likely to be the case. So it was a legitimate procedure. It was ultra-virus. And the coalition, and I know the Democratic Alliance also have already indicated that they will approach the courts and to have this set aside. And I think they will succeed. That's the first thing that's most likely going to happen. However, once that has happened, it does not change the power relationship within the council at the moment. So let's argue and say that we succeed and the court set this illegal process aside. What then will happen is it will be a rerun of the same process, but this time it will be a legitimate process. But as long as the power relation doesn't change in the council, and as long as the Patriotic Alliance decides to stay with the ANC and put their future in the hands of the ANC, then the same power arrangement will exist. And this time around, Mr. Morere will just be elected in a legal fashion. So let's accept that's going to be the process, and that's what's going to play out. Now, the Freedom Front Plus and all the other coalition partners throughout, our first and only priority is what is in the best interest of the inhabitants, the citizens of the city of Johannesburg. They are the ones that voted for parties. They are the ones that decided not to put the ANC back into power with a majority. They are the ones that are entitled to service delivery and effective government and no corruption. And we respect that, and we will act in all the ways that we can to make that possible. We are not going to be an obstructive group of people and try to do exactly what the ANC did in the past. We will not do that. We will play the role that we need to play, and it depends on the power arrangements that could happen. I want to see how long this unholy alliance is going to hold between the ANC and the EFF. Because remember now, the ANC can't govern. The Patriotic Alliance is irrelevant in that instance. Yes, the 8 votes are important for that coalition, maybe so. But in the broader scheme of things in Johannesburg, you are now going to have a government of the ANC and the EFF, basically, and there will be some crumbs going to some of the smaller parties. The question is going to be for the citizens, how long is this coalition going to last between the ANC and the EFF? That is the first time it has happened, and we'll see how that plays out. So we won't be obstructive in terms of destabilizing. That's not how we work. We are serious about democracy. But the citizens should be very concerned because there's a certain track record looking back into the past in terms of service delivery given by the ANC, and that spells only bad news.
All right, but I think one of the issues that South Africans are asking themselves is about this stability of these coalitions, because it all started in Nelson Mandela Bay when the ANC led coalition and the mayor were ousted. And I think that's what irked the ANC more. They said, if they can take our people out in Nelson Mandela Bay, we're going to show them in the city of Johannesburg. I'm not sure in terms of the numbers, Dr. Mulder, but there are assertions that similar attempts might be made in Ekurhuleni as well as the city of Tshwane. Are you concerned about that? What does the number say?
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Nelson Mandela Bay is a very difficult metro in terms of the electoral result. It's a nightmare because the result is such that it's almost impossible to form any government in Nelson Mandela Bay. If you look at coalitions, of course, the ideal is to have a coalition with less parties, and less parties are easier to manage and it creates a more stable coalition because you deal with one or two or three parties. In Nelson Mandela Bay, for example, regardless of who forms that government, you are talking about coalitions of 8, 9 or 10 parties that come together, and the number of them are one-member parties. And it's very easy it seems in South Africa, unfortunately, that it's very easy for an opponent to try and convince by whatever means, and I'm not going into details, one member party to change his or her mind. And that's what happened in Nelson Mandela Bay. I'm not convinced that what happened in the city of Johannesburg now has been triggered directly by events in Nelson Mandela Bay. The fact that the ANC lost the 3 metros in Gauteng has been a huge problem for them right from the beginning. If you look at the position papers of the ANC at the recent policy conference, they clearly spelled it out that the loss of the 3 metros in Gauteng for the ANC was devastating, for the simple reason that it wiped out the leadership in the province, etc., etc. And the ANC is very much aware of the fact that they need to make some progress in that regard to try and hold on to the province in less than 2 years. We are going to take Gauteng out of the hands of the ANC and a coalition, regardless of what happens in Johannesburg now. So one must also understand that there's a new chairperson elected for the ANC, Mr. Lesufi, and Mr. Paul Mashatile has got his own ambitions, and they are going into this little experiment now to walk a road with the EFF. And I can assure you it's not all that nicely accepted in the ANC on other levels. But it seems that this grouping wants to set the tone for national in 2024 to go into a coalition, and the electorate will take note of that in terms of giving or withholding their support from the ANC. You are correct. Obviously, Ekurhuleni will be next, and the reason for being next is the fact is that even before these events, since the election, we have always had a minority government in Ekurhuleni. It was not possible to form a majority government. So from day one, the ANC could have governed in Ekurhuleni with the assistance of the EFF. But they couldn't find each other, and since the election until now, we formed a coalition that governed Ekurhuleni, and we could do so as a minority government because the ANC and the EFF were not going together. Now, since the EFF and the ANC got married, and they are now in this holy marriage of theirs, most likely they will bring a motion of no confidence in Ekurhuleni, and they will bring that government to a fall. Tshwane is a different kettle of fish altogether. In Tshwane, there's a clear majority for, let's say, trustworthy parties who can act in the best interest of the electorate. The coalition in Tshwane consists basically of 5 parties: the Democratic Alliance, Action SA is there, the Freedom Fund Plus is there, IFP, and the ACDP. No patriotic alliance in that coalition that can destabilize. Good is there, but that's a different kettle of fish with one member, and we'll talk about that if need be.
All right, 24 minutes before the hour 11 o'clock. My special guest, Dr. Corné Mulder. We're going to take a quick break. When we return, we'll also be taking your calls on 0861 987 000. I saw some tweets that came through at Power FM 987 using the hashtag Power Week or directly at Murio Mriano. We'll be taking them all after this break.
Live on channel 889 on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Power 98.7. Now we're talking.
All right, welcome back. It's gone 21 minutes before the hour 11 o'clock. Let me take a quick look at some of the tweets that came through before we reconnect with Dr. Mulder. Freedom Rasimpi is saying, Mr. Murio, coalition government is not working for South Africa. We are just helping people like Julius Malema to play with our votes. We just need to go back to the ANC. And then the real Bramakabaza saying, Bram Muriano, saying the ANC never wanted to accept that they lost power. Doesn't make sense. Any opposition party keeps fighting to win, Mus. They may just accept the political laws. Diamante saying at the EFF South Africa doesn't Freedom Flam Plus doesn't owe Freedom Flam Plus anything. They can marry whoever they want with their approval. John Mpatswe saying that these parties must stop crying as if they are entitled to govern the municipalities. They didn't win. They must stop insulting the ANC as if there are no people who didn't vote for the ANC. They must go and win elections outright. All right, Dr. Mulder, let's just, before we move into one important question I want to post about constitutional amendments pertaining to the coalitions. You, as the party in the coalition, you sacrificed your seat and gave it to the Patriotic Alliance in the spirit of coalition and understanding that coalitions are all about compromise. It's not a case of the winner takes all. But the leader of that coalition, being the DA, is being accused of being arrogant and not even willing to compromise. So going forward, do you still see yourselves, being part of this coalition where a party like the DA continues to be arrogant, continues to refuse to compromise, while any other members of the coalition are prepared to compromise?
I think I can try to respond in the following manner. First of all, we drafted the coalition agreement very carefully so that it clearly states that no party is leading the coalition. They are all known as multi-party coalition governments, but the fact of the matter is that the DA is the bigger party in terms of representation, specifically also in the city of Johannesburg, as well as in the city of Tshwane. So that is the reality. It's correct. We did sacrifice the one Mako position we had in the city of Johannesburg to accommodate the Patriotic Alliance. And the Patriotic Alliance decided that that's not good enough. It seems they want some more. You're absolutely correct. That is the way the coalition should be. You should be prepared to sacrifice things. Let me say, in defense of the Democratic Alliance, it is not correct that the Democratic Alliance have not been prepared to make sacrifices. They've also made sacrifices throughout the process during the negotiations. And also when we renegotiate things, they did make some sacrifices in terms of certain positions, etc., etc. However, in terms of the current situation, the DA felt very strongly that they were entitled to that position of Speaker and they were not prepared to let go of that position of Speaker. They did make a compromise to not come back with the same candidate and they came with somebody else. The question was, and that was what the other parties argued, to say, yes, we understand that you feel strongly about the position of Speaker, but we believe that it would stabilize the coalition if we were prepared. And one could ask the question, if the candidate was from the IFP, the Speaker's candidate on behalf of the coalition, if it was an IFP candidate, whether the ANC and the EFF would so easily have voted against an IFP candidate, although that candidate may be of the coalition. Maybe they would, maybe they would not have. So one understands that. The Freedom Front Plus is absolutely committed to remain part of coalitions because that is the future. That is what's going to happen in South Africa. We've had an abnormal situation since 1994. If you look at our electoral system, it's strictly proportional. Strictly proportional systems makes for coalition government. We've had an abnormal situation since 1994 with a proportional system where one party obtained more than the majority, more than 50% throughout the ANC. We are now at the point where the ANC will start to go below 50%. At the moment when that happens, coalitions come to the fore. That is the future. That is what's going to happen. The Freedom Front Plus has played a very significant role in the formation of these coalitions, and we want to project the message to the electorate that the Freedom Front Plus is a trustworthy coalition partner, and they will continue to play that role. And my prediction is this is a setback in the city of Johannesburg, But in 2024, we will have most likely a coalition in the province of Gauteng, most likely in the Western Cape, maybe somewhere else in KZN, and maybe even on national level. And I getting answer to one of those tweets, yes, it's absolutely the right of the ANC to try and get the political power back. Nobody says they shouldn't do that. The question is in what way, in terms of how, in a legitimate way, in a legal way, in an honest way, no problem. That is what politics is about. But if you use other means, then it starts to become a huge problem. And that is, I think, what we experienced, and that is not part of the political game. It shouldn't be like that.
Dr. Mulder, you mentioned earlier that our legislation is out of date, and the constraints that are posed by the fact that 14 days after the elections, municipalities have to form governments, and that time is too short a time, especially in a case where you don't have an outright winner. So I'm just curious to find out that from a Freedom Front Plus perspective, are you considering sponsoring a motion in Parliament to deal with this issue? Because, like we say, a lot of people are predicting that, in future, even at national level, we are going to experience coalitions, either at provincial level or even at national level. So the issue of dealing with this 14-day window period that we have to form governments, are you going to do anything, or have you done something about it already in Parliament?
Yes. No, we realize the problem that we've got in this regard, and we need to act immediately, because the fact is the following. When we get to the national election in 2024 and the result comes out, there are also some time frames indicated in terms of when Parliament needs to meet, and then we need to elect a Speaker of Parliament, and we need to elect a President of the Republic. Now, the problem is, just imagine we get back to Parliament with 400 members in Parliament in total, and no party's got a clear majority of 200 plus one. You will have a coalition situation, and we believe that we can form that coalition. But you don't want to have a situation where parties are forced under immense time pressure to quickly agree we're going to elect X or Y as the new Speaker of Parliament, or Z or whatever, W, or whatever the case may be, as the new President. So we will see how we need to do and what we can do to convince. I think that all the parties understand that. I think even the ANC now understands the reality of coalition politics in South Africa. I think they understand that, and we need to bring our legislation in line, because if you look at the international best practice, what happens in these kind of systems, there are time given for parties to negotiate meaningful coalitions. It can take up to 6-7 weeks, it can take 2-3 months. But in most of those countries, they have a very stable, very efficient civil service. In other words, while the politicians are negotiating the formation of a new government for the rest of the term, the country continues as is, because the civil service basically continues to do what they need to do. If that is the case in South Africa, it's obviously also a different question.
All right. Interesting. Before I go to a caller, Basil in Kempton Park, Dr. Mulder, maybe I should phrase it differently. And you're quite right in terms of saying, if the civil servants, it's not politicized, they understand their duty is to do the service and not to serve the aspirations of MMCs and politicians and ministers and so forth. But it is a different kettle of fish in this country. And that's one thing as the citizens we must push to have this civil service professionalized. But
absolutely,
on the issue of the time frame post the voting period, we know that the Constitutional Court declared some parts of the Electoral Act unconstitutional, and they took it back to you in Parliament to say you got to regularize this, you got to make sure that the Electoral Act is compliant. Don't you think, as part of getting the Electoral Act compliant, it is an opportune time now to include things that has to do with the coalitions as well, so that we come up with a fully fledged package that is being legislated in the National Assembly, and possibly it helps us to prevent some of the challenges that might come in 2024 and beyond.
I think you're absolutely right. The original Constitutional Court judgment basically dealt with the question of independence to participate, etc. It basically dealt with the electoral system, and you're right. That process is playing itself out in Parliament at the moment. But the question is, what do we need to do and where do we need to amend to also make provision to accommodate the formation of coalition government in South Africa? And it could be that we'll have to look at the Constitution, but I'm not sure it's necessarily in the Constitution. It could be in the rules of Parliament. It could be in the legislation dealing with the elections and the declaration of the results, etc. But you're absolutely right, and we will definitely look into those things to see what we can do to prevent a situation that could cause a repeat in the way that we were forced into election of speakers and mayors on a very short time frame after the local government elections. You're absolutely right.
Let me go to Basil in Kempton Park. Basil, good morning to you. Welcome.
Hi, Maria. Good morning, and to your guest.
Yes,
Maria. I think DA constantly scores own goals. So first, it was the issue of the paging or the perceived paging of black leaders, and that which is still continuing. They are living in drones, and that is a problem. Secondly, is the issue of the way the messaging of this whole coalition and what your guest is saying. So if you say DA-led coalition or DA is a bigger party within the coalition, so it's a bigger brother, it's a problem because we must supposed to be, you were not given an outright mandate, so you're supposed to compromise. So if you want to take the seat of or the position of a mayor and a speaker, it becomes a problem because even the other parties have to advance their own mandates from their own constituencies. What happens in that regard? So for me, their arrogance in terms, or their perceived arrogance in terms of not being able to negotiate and compromise, that is their biggest stumbling block. And to some, as my parting shot, to some of the people, it says, we told you that this DA, they don't have the interest in the main of black people. So it becomes a serious problem, and the ANC is capitalizing in that, I think.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much. Basil there from Kempton Park. Fanko Madida, just a second there,
sure.
Dr. Melba.
Sure.
Just let me look at some of the tweets. Fanko Madida saying, at Murio Muriano, I remember when Herman Mashaba was still the mayor of Joburg in 2016, he once said the DA is a difficult party to work with because they were refusing to work with the EFF. All right, you can step in there, Dr. Mulder. The arrogance of DA is still coming up.
Let me try to react to your caller, and I hear what he is saying. Obviously, you'll understand, I can't speak on behalf of Democratic Alliance, but what I'd like to say with regard to the Democratic Alliance, they obviously see differently, and they would say they are not the party that is anti-black or anti-purging people from their party, and they feel strongly about that. I will not express myself, it's not my party. The fact of the matter is, if there's a perception from the other coalition partners, rightly or wrongly so, that one party is bullying them or is arrogant, then obviously it's serious and it should be taken on board and it should be dealt with. Let me just give you an example. A week ago, I returned from a visit to Denmark, and that was an interesting visit to Denmark. It was an invitation from the Danish government. It was a multi-party government, a multi-party visit consisting of 8 political parties. The ANC was present, the DA was there, the EFF was there, the Freedom Front Plus, the ISP, Good, 8 parties in total. And what we learned from the Danish experience is the following, and I think we should take a note in that regard. In Denmark, the biggest party, the one that is taking the lead in the coalition, the bigger party, they are the humblest of the lot. Why are they so? Because they realize and they understand that although they are the bigger one with more votes in the council, without the votes of any of the other coalition parties, their bigger numbers mean nothing. And they need to do everything that they can to accommodate and bring the other groups with them because they need each and every one of those votes so that their larger numbers will count. And I think that is it depends on a mindset in terms of how do you interact with the other parties. Now, obviously, the Democratic Alliance will say, we've done exactly that. And whether that's factual or not, so be it. The point is, some of the other opposition parties in these coalitions experienced something else. Some may be legitimate, some may be not all that legitimate, but it's a very fine line that the bigger party needs to walk in terms of doing what they need to do, but to bring along and to accommodate the aspirations and the views of all. And it's difficult. That's one of the challenges of coalitions. But it also brings out a very good form of government if you can do it correctly, because no one can do just what they want. You have to compromise. You have to accommodate the views of others, and that brings, as far as I'm concerned, a better form of government.
Bob Stakes on Twitter saying Tshwane will be led by EFF, Ekurhuleni by Ntate Mashaba. I don't think that will happen, because when they take over, they take everything. Bateka Inkwaso. The real Bra Makabasa on Twitter saying coalitions work only when there is a common cause. The big mistake that these parties make is thinking that being against the ANC is common cause. The thing here is there is no common cause to benefit the majority, which is the black people of Azania. Dr. Mulder, in your coalition, what is your common cause? Is your common cause just to push back against the ANC?
No.
Yeah?
No, if the ANC had acceptable policies in South Africa, we most likely would have all supported the ANC. It's because of the policies of the ANC that the country is in the doldrums that they are at the moment. So those policy problems are at the core of why coalition governments are against the ANC. And I'm not even talking about the policies of the EFF. You'll find them in North Korea and in Venezuela. So the fact of the matter is, when we negotiated these coalitions, we did not start off by saying, okay, fine, what do we have in common? We all don't like the ANC, and now let's dish out positions. Absolutely not. Coalition governments do last start off by negotiating basic values that we agree on. And that is exactly, if you look at the coalition agreements that we've signed, they start off on that premise, certain principles in common, service delivery, excellence, no corruption. You can go through them, all the basic best international practice that a government should have. Those values we take as combined. And then we come out into terms of core priorities, etc., etc. It's definitely not a question of ganging up against this or that. It's about policies. And obviously, if the ANC had policies that created jobs, did have policies that created and grew the economy, I'm not even talking about the fact that the country is in permanent darkness. All those are direct results of ANC policies. And that is why coalitions will come together, not only now, but also in 2024 in some provinces and on national level. And the suggestion that the EFF will govern Tshwane, not soon.
Okay, Dr. Mulder, let's talk values. It's one thing, values of ethical conduct, anti-corruption, and so on. But policies, it is the other thing. Let's look at some of the policies that you say. Well, I'm not sure whether you agree with them or not. But what we know for a fact as the ANC policy: expropriation of land without compensation. One, two, issues of affirmative action and BEE. Are you saying those are some of the policy positions that you don't support?
Absolutely. Remember now, the coalitions that we're talking about at the moment on local level were negotiated dealing with issues on local level in terms of local government, in terms of the powers and competences at local government, and the services that one renders. And on local government level, to a very large extent, it's about service delivery. People want services. As you correctly pointed out right in the beginning, electricity, water, and those kind of things, it's about that. When you get to a government on national level, it will be about national policy issues. And you're correct. The ANC and the EFF will support expropriation without compensation, the whole question of affirmative action, the whole question of BEE. One should ask ourselves, how did we get in terms of the destruction of civil service and service delivery in many instances if those things did not play a role in making it very difficult? So I think fundamentally there's a fundamental difference in policy, specifically when it comes to the economic sector. And how do you see the future? Freedom Front Plus and other parties that have the same kind of thing in common believes in free enterprise, in allowing the individual to prosper, in allowing the private sector to prosper, etc. We do not believe it's for the state to create jobs. We've seen that A bloated civil service is not going to succeed. You need private, small and medium businesses and make it possible for people in terms of tax incentives to create small businesses so that they can look after themselves and their families. So there's a fundamental difference in terms of policy when it comes to that level. And I believe if we get to the position where we negotiate a new coalition on national level in about 22 months from now, those will be part of those policy issues. And I can assure you there's already discussions going on to look into the different policy realities that will be built into such a new government.
Dr. Corné Mulder, we thank you very much for joining us this morning, the leader of the Freedom Front Plus in the Western Cape and the chairman of the Technical Committee on Coalitions.